Will privacy law ever move at the speed of technology? I'm Tonya Hall for ZDNet and Tech Republic, and joining me is Jordan Walbesser, counsel at Mattel. Welcome, Jordan.
Thanks for having me.
What are your areas of involvement at Mattel?
So I do a few things over at Mattel. One of them is a mixture of intellectual property and licensing. I also work on a lot of technology work, including privacy, software, and even some machine learning things that we're working on. So I have a pretty broad practice there, but definitely heavy on the tech side.
You have some novel proposals about privacy, but before we get into those, what got you interested in privacy and what problems need to be solved?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've always been a tech nerd all my life. In fact, before I started doing law, I was a computer engineer. So that's always been a passion, technology. But privacy is really fascinating, especially because our laws haven't caught up to the way that companies and governments are using data, and even our most recent laws haven't caught up with the idea of being able to aggregate such granular data about people or groups. So it's a really fascinating area, and there's some work that needs to be done. And there's continuous work that needs to be done in order to keep up with the times. And unfortunately, in the legal world, which moves slowly, that can be hard to do.
Explain zone-based privacy.
Yeah, so here's the idea. It's something that I read in a recent paper by Dr. Veronica Barassi out at the Goldsmiths University of London. And it's the idea that having privacy settings and maybe even privacy laws based on the zone in which the information was captured. So much of our privacy laws are based on who we're capturing information from and where they're located geographically. But in this report, they use the term home life data, which is, I think, really interesting. And it talks a little bit about the information that's captured at home and why it should be different than information that's captured in public or in business situations.
Amazon Echo, Google Home, Siri, your smart TV, they're all listening all the time. How do we really know what is or isn't actually being captured?
Yeah, so I think that's sort of the point, and that's the idea behind this zone-based privacy. When you're in a situation as an adult and you're giving information to a device, maybe that's on your browser, maybe that's on your phone, what you're giving is granular and hopefully controllable, and it's also directly correlated to you. With things like Alexa and Google Home, now you're in a situation where you have an entire family that might be using those devices. So it's not just you as an adult giving out that information. It could be your children talking to Alexa, cracking jokes with Alexa or Google Home or whatever that may be. So, or talking to your smart TV, things like that. So, how do we know what information is being distributed and being collected? Hopefully it's in the privacy policies for all of that equipment, which very few people read. And there are some granularity to what you can control for at least Amazon and Google. But it's difficult to tell what is being swept up. And that's kind of this whole idea about legislating and controlling information based on the home, for example, instead of whose account is linked to the device.
Governments use traffic cameras, microphone arrays, credit card tracking, and other tools to gather data on the public. How do we know if our Fourth and Fifth Amendment protections are in place?
Well, how do we know? Unfortunately, the only time we know is if they're tested. And there's been a number of cases that have gone through the system in the United States and have even gone up to the Supreme Court, especially when it comes to mobile phone tracking, where, what rights do we as citizens have for the Fourth and the Fifth Amendment. And it's something that we constantly have to reevaluate what that means. Obviously, the authors of the Constitution weren't thinking about cell phones. They weren't thinking about home devices that can tell us where to go to eat and and who we're calling and the things that we're talking about. So that's constantly being redefined, and that's almost a cultural thing as well, the expectations of privacy that we have with these devices as we continue to use them.
What about privacy for minors? How should we be approaching that?
So, it's very interesting. Our current approach to privacy for minors is, I mean, we have specific laws, COPA, for example, in the United States, that prohibits the collection of data of those that are under the age of 13. And many times, in order to even join a website, you have to, or sign in or create an account, you have to be above a certain age, typically the age of majority, in order to do so. However, we know that people under the age of 13 are creating Instagram accounts and Facebook accounts and Twitter accounts and so on and so forth. So, I mean, to answer your question, I think we should be more careful with the information that a minor is disclosing, intentionally or not. It isn't quite fair to them, I think, both from the standards of the law, but also culturally, that information can be collected and used against them, because they just don't have the ability to consent or even the understanding of what they're giving away, and what that could potentially mean.
Facial and voice recognition technology is beginning to infer human emotion. What are the implications of IoT devices reporting what it considers to be misbehavior?
Yeah, machine learning is really, really fascinating, and that's something that I'm passionate about. And I've looked into some of the algorithms that will look at facial features and say, this person's happy, this person's sad, this person's upset. The problem with any of these technologies, as they're still in their infancy, and in some cases their adolescence, is the accuracy. So being able to make those judgment calls for a computer is still very difficult and is still rather inaccurate. And it's something I think that companies are starting to struggle with. They're experimenting with, but at the end of the day, they're not able to tell with a level of reliability the emotions that someone is facing. Hey, as humans, we're still struggling trying to figure out the emotions that someone has by looking at their face alone. So there's all sorts of factors and the machine learning will get better as we bring in more data sources, the inflection, the tone of their voice, infrared signals that's coming from their faces to see if they're really smiling or if it's just posed. I mean, there's all sorts of things that are going to happen. And we're just not there yet. We're just not there yet with how the law and privacy policy should control the capture and dissemination of that data.
All right, Jordan. Ultimately, who regulates the regulators?
Well, idealistically, that's us, the voters, the citizens, the people that are voting for our elected officials. And if this is an important issue, as it should be, hopefully it's something that makes its way into campaign platforms. Unfortunately, realistically, it's probably only going to become an issue when there's a problem. And we started to see that a bit with large tech companies like Facebook and Google, and some concerns about the information that they're storing and collecting, and most importantly, that information and privacy being breached. That's where people are being concerned. So it's up to us, it's up to not-for-profit agencies like the EFF and others to keep an eye out. And the industry, to some degree, also monitors itself. So, those organizations, as linear as they are, still have an eye out for these issues and want to self-regulate, because if not them, then it'll be the government. And it's always easier to have an industry regulatory authority than, Big Brother watching over you.
I couldn't agree more. Jordan Walbesser, counsel at Mattel. If somebody wants to connect with you, maybe they want to find out more about the kinds of things that you're talking about, zone-based privacy and such, how can they do that?
Sure. I'm all over the internet. Just search Jordan Walbesser in Google. You'll find me. LinkedIn is probably the best way to get in touch. I also have a Twitter, which is just at Jordan Walbesser. So if you have any questions and want to follow up, I'm there.
Great. And if you guys want to find more of my interviews, you can do that right here on ZDNet or Tech Republic, or maybe go to my website, tonyahall.net. I've got links to all my social sites. Thanks for watching.